50% of the people who've had their first severe heart attack will die within 5 years. Heart disease is still the #1 cause of death in the Western world, more than all types of cancers together. In fact, 1 of every 3 death cases in the US is caused by heart diseases. Myocardial infarction or heart attack capture a significant fracture of these diseases, and it happens when a major blood vessel that nourishes the left ventricle is blocked. As a consequence, blood, oxygen, nutrients can no longer reach this left ventricle of the heart. As you know, the heart is a muscle that pumps blood throughout the body, and it does it through cardiomyocytes, cardiac muscle cells. These cardiac muscle cells are very sensitive cells. If they don't get oxygen for several minutes, they simply die. They're also very special because just like neurons of the brain, they cannot divide in the body. This means that we're born with a certain number of cells, and once the damage is caused, we cannot revive this organ. So instead of proliferation of cells, division of cells, a scar tissue is formed on the heart. This scar tissue is very stiff, cannot contract, cannot send pulses of blood to the rest of the body, and people die. So this leads to the poor statistics saying that 50% of the people who've had a severe heart attack will die within 5 years. To prevent these people from dying, we need to do two things. Immediately, we need to open the blocked blood vessels, and we do it with stents. But we also need to provide medications to allow the surviving cells of the heart to work harder, to contract stronger, and this we do with medications. However, these treatments do not cure the diseased heart. They only treat the symptoms. So currently, the only solution for the end-stage patient is heart transplantation. However, we know that there's shortage in donors, and even if we manage to find the right donors, there's always a risk that the body will reject the new heart. So, as you probably understood by now, there's no good solution for us for heart regeneration. And over the last 30 years, researchers have been trying to develop new approaches to repopulate this scar tissue on the heart with cells that can contract, cells that will allow the heart to pump again. This was done with different approaches. For example, one of the approaches, the early approaches, was to take cells that can contract and inject them directly to the left ventricle, to the scar tissue. But these cells could not form interactions between one another and could not integrate into the left ventricle, into this harsh condition of the scar tissue. So researchers have been trying to build tissues in the lab, to assemble tissues in the lab to form something that contract. Sorry, there's something here. Oops. To form tissues in the lab and then to transplant them. This is exactly what we're doing in my lab at Tel Aviv University. We're developing new tissue engineering approaches to regenerate the diseased heart. So when we're talking about tissues, we need to understand that tissues in the body are not just cells. The cells are very important. However, the biomaterial in between the cells, which is called extracellular matrix, is very important as well. It helps the cells to assemble into a functioning tissue, and it serves like a glue. It glues the cells together. And what we do in the lab is engineer biomaterials to mimic this extracellular matrix. And if we do it properly and we seed cardiac muscle cells, we can create fully functional cardiac or heart patches that contract nicely in the lab for a long period of time without external stimulation. So when we take these heart patches and transplant them into animals that had heart attacks, we could see that 24 hours later, most of the cells within these heart patches are dead. When we analyzed the patches later on, we saw that blood vessels could not penetrate into these heart patches, and the cells did not get any oxygen. So the next step was to take these biomaterials and seed them with endothelial cells and cardiac muscle cells. And endothelial cells, these are cells that form blood vessels. So we simply mix the cells together to create blood vessel networks within the heart patches. When we took these patches and transplanted them in animals, we could see a very nice regeneration of the diseased heart. We could see it after 1 month, but if we waited enough, 1 more month, we could see that these patches are slowly being rejected from the body. And we started thinking what was the reason for that, because the cells came from the patient or from the animal itself, but the biomaterial was synthetic material, and the body doesn't recognize these synthetic materials as something that can work in the body. So there is an immune response. So we said that we need to create heart patches that will be compatible with the patient. And how can we create materials that will not provoke an immune response? And for that, we decided to rely on the patient's own building blocks to create heart patches from the patient's own cells and the patient's own materials. And for that, we developed a way to take a fatty tissue biopsy from the patient. So we take this fatty tissue, we separate the fat cells and the extracellular matrix. The fat cells are certainly not cardiac muscle cells, so we need to create cardiac muscle cells from these cells. So we genetically engineer these cells to become stem cells. Stem cells are cells of the early developmental stage of the embryo. So we create these cells and then we transform these cells to become cardiac muscle cells. We apply molecules just like with the development of the heart in the embryo. So we create cardiac muscle cells and endothelial cells for blood vessels, and the biomaterial, the extracellular matrix of this fatty tissue, is processed to become a hydrogel, a gel that is fully personalized for the patient. So once we mix these cells together, we can create fully functional heart patches with blood vessels that will never provoke an immune response. So they completely fit the immunological profile of the patient. However, what about the anatomy of the patient? We need to feed these patches to the heart. And if we just take the cells and allow them to self-assemble into blood vessel networks within the patch, they will not fit the architecture of the blood vessels of the patient. And for that, what we've decided to do was to use a 3D printer. So we took a 3D printer and we took the biomaterials from the patient with the blood vessel forming cells and the cardiac cells, and we 3D printed the heart patch according to a CT image of the patient. So now we have a fully functional cardiac patch, heart patch, with endothelial cells to form blood vessels, with cardiac muscle cells to contract. They fit the immunological profile of the patient, and they also fit the anatomy of the patient. So we're very excited about these results, which can surely help a lot of patients. However, why stop there? Why not print full hearts? And this was exactly what we've done next. We took the technology further and we developed a way to print volumetric organs. This is a small-scale human heart with the patient's own materials and the patient's own cells. The heart is immature. The cells can contract, however, they're not contracting synchronously. The blood vessels are very basic. And in the next step, what we do now in the lab, we develop the specialized bioreactors that we can cultivate these hearts within. We can pump blood through these blood vessels to nourish the heart. And we provide electromechanical stimulation to teach the cells how to work together, how to contract nicely, to have a pumping ability. So this is what we're doing, and hopefully by 2021 we will have a fully functional heart that pumps blood, and then we'll be able to test it in animals. But what if the cells in this heart are not working properly? What if the cells are not contracting synchronously? What if there's not enough oxygen, or if there's inflammation? What can we do about that? And to address this challenge, what we decided to do was to incorporate into an engineered tissue nano and microelectronics. Now, these nano and microelectronics allows us to regulate and control the function of the tissue. So we sense the function, and then we can provide electrical stimulation. For example, if the heart is not beating 60 times a minute, or if there is some kind of problem. So if you think about the technology, the patient is sitting in his house, is not feeling well. Obviously, there's something wrong with the patient's heart. The physician can log on to the computer, can see the function of the tissue, and can decide how he wants to remotely activate this heart. So if there's not enough beats per minute, can just type on the computer and provide electrical stimulation, just like a pacemaker. If it senses that there is not enough oxygen, we can release certain factors that will bring stem cells from the body to build blood vessels and instruct them to build them in the right place. If we sense that there is inflammation, we can release anti-inflammatory drugs. These are not things that I imagine. We already done these things in the lab, and we're looking forward to do it in animals, to take these hearts to animals. So I told you about the things that we're doing with the heart, because we're the most advanced with the heart. However, we also work in the lab on different tissues. We engineer spinal cord implants for spinal cord injuries. We engineer dopaminergic implants for Parkinson's disease. We also 3D print the retina, and we even create bionic intestine. So bionic organs will not be here tomorrow. It will not happen. We will not see people walking in the street with bionic organs. However, I'm sure that in 50 years, every person will have at least one bionic organ that will help to regulate and monitor the function, and maybe even endow them with enhanced capabilities. So it's not science fiction, it's science, and it's happening right now. Thank you.